When you're wired for success, but conditioned in our Western society especially, then you know that there's more, you want there to be more, but you also believe that there has to be a process, a roadmap, a recipe, a plan to get there. So you've got this, what we call a cognitive dissonance. You don't believe everything you're hearing, but you don't know anything else to believe. So there's this dissonance, there's this frustration. So if you want to know what that black cab driver feels, they feel frustrated every day because they know there's more, they want more, they just don't know how to do it. Even worse, they have probably tried. Dude, there's this heartbreaking story for me. It's a business heartbreaking story. I was in Portland, Oregon. I was sitting with this 24-year-old kid who worked part-time at a brewery, right? I must have been 38 years old, very young in Everyday Spy. Everyday Spy was 2 years old at the time. And I was sitting with this kid, and he had no ambition. He worked part-time at a brewery, and he was totally happy to do it. He lived with 4 roommates. He drank beer every afternoon starting at 2 o'clock. Funny fucking guy. Really funny dude to hang out with, but he had no goals, no ambitions, no aspirations. And I was like, what did your parents do? And he was like, oh, my mom ran her own business from our farm in whatever it was, Idaho or something like that. I was like, oh, what did she do? And he was like, well, she only had her own business for a few years, but she would cater to the other families in the other farming families. So she would make 5 or 7 dinners and then sell that to the other farmers' families so they would have extra food so that the wives of those families could take care of their 7 or 12 kids or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why don't you want to be an entrepreneur if your mom was an entrepreneur? And he was like, oh, well, she was really inspiring to me. And at first I thought I might want to be an entrepreneur. But the thing was, my mom never felt like a success because she failed. He was like, my mom only was able to run her catering business for about 3 years before it failed. And I was like, well, why did you say she was an entrepreneur? And he was like, because to me, she was. She started a business. She ran it for 3 years, doing what she loved. She was an entrepreneur. But then all that work, she still failed in the end. So his rationale was, why even try? But he still looked up to his mom as being an entrepreneur. So the thing that kills me is that there are so many entrepreneurs out there who are trying and failing. And some of them, after they failed 2 or 3 times, they stop trying and they just accept the shed and they accept that this is the circle that's drawn around me and this is the way it has to be. They don't even realize that 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 more attempts is going to be when they get their big breakthrough. All they need is a recipe. So my goal in life every day is just get 1 more person to follow the simplest recipe.
What is your favorite case study of someone that followed the recipe and changed their life?
In my company?
Yeah.
My favorite case study is me.
Yeah.
Because I'm the one that reaps the benefits of it every day. I have multiple people who have had some pretty awesome success. I have one gentleman who recently wrote to me who told me that for the first time in his life, I think he was in his mid-30s, for the first time in his life, he has a 6-figure job now. And he was an engineer. And he wrote me to tell me that one of the frameworks that we taught him through our company helped him get a $32,000 raise and a promotion to a senior level in his company, where for the last 5 years, he'd been asking for a promotion, asking for a raise, and his bosses always just told him no, or he wasn't qualified or he wasn't fit. But then he started practicing one of our frameworks, and 9 months later was promoted without asking.
Which framework?
He didn't tell me which framework. Oh, he told me it was coming from we have a master course called Operational Thinking. Mm-hmm. And inside that, we teach many influence frameworks. Mm-hmm. So it was clearly a framework of influence that he had tapped into. I also recently we have this event in Las Vegas called the Intel Edge, where we bring in a number of speakers from the intelligence world. I have an FBI speaker who comes in. I have a Green Beret who comes in. I have a exercise scientists come in. I even had recently I had a great friend of mine who's an Emmy award-winning journalist, an investigative journalist come in. And we teach in Las Vegas, we teach hundreds of people at a time. We had one person who wrote from that Intel Edge event. He was a Puerto Rican guy. His name is Emmanuel. Emmanuel, if you're listening, I love you, brother. But Emmanuel just had a baby, first baby with his wife. And within the first month of having the baby, his company laid him off. So he had all these life changes, a new baby. He was so proud and so excited to be a dad. And then he was facing unemployment. And he applied our framework, specifically our framework on mirroring and winning the interviewer instead of winning the interview. And about 3 months after he was laid off, he got a new job in a science lab that paid him more than he had ever earned before. And he came to the next Intel Edge event that we had. So we saw him in, say, October, and he came back to us again in March, something like that. And he came back and he told us this story, and my whole team lit up. My whole team was like, because we had all seen him when he was showing us pictures of the baby. And then we all saw the email from him that said, my company laid me off. I don't know how I'm going to take care of my family. And then we see him again, and he's like, guys, you'll never believe what happened. Like, I did this thing. I followed your mirroring example. I won over the interviewer, and now I have this job that I would have never gotten otherwise. These are the stories that I'm spoiled by. I have my customer service team and even my executive team. We don't see all the testimonials that we get because we've become a little bit desensitized to them because they happen so often. And I love it when they happen, but I'm not surprised when they happen because, of course, the recipes work. The recipes work because they were refined in the center of CIA. They've been working for ages. They just haven't ever been shared with the public.
I think the reason why there was 2 subjects in school that I was really good at, or at least that I enjoyed, therefore I was better at. For me to be good at something, I didn't go to many lessons in school, so I was bad at most things, but the 2 lessons that I went to were psychology and business. And at a very young age, I think maybe 14 years old, I had this idea implanted into my head that I always have repeated. I'm 31 now, and I think I've definitely repeated this sentence or this phrase 10 times a year since I was 14. And the crux of it is that the only thing standing in my way of being the world's greatest entrepreneur, philanthropist, salesperson is just a bunch of people. Like, it was very early on, I had this seed in my head that the barriers to life, the barriers to riches, to whatever you want, are just people. So if you can understand people and how to influence them, then you hold the keys to the city, the proverbial city. So when you talked about this influence framework, I thought maybe that's the most important thing to talk about, because A, do you agree with what I said as like a foundational seed in your mind, that it's just people? And then B, I'd love to talk about how we influence people.
So yes, I agree with you that people are all that stand in the way. And we have to remember that we ourselves are people.
Yeah.
So we're part of the problem.
Yeah.
And influence frameworks are powerful frameworks for getting what you want. I think the place to start, because not all frameworks are simple. Remember how we were talking about there's foundational frameworks, there's 2-step frameworks, and then there's 12-step frameworks, right? The thing to understand is frameworks all fit within each other. They fit like nesting dolls, like Russian nesting dolls. So when you learn any kind of framework that has to do with influence, what you also have to learn are the sub-frameworks inside of it to be able to execute the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But the place to really start is understand that influence and persuasion are not the same thing, right? Persuasion is what happens when you actively put energy into changing someone's mind or getting someone to take a certain action with active energy. Influence is what you have when you're not talking. So I can sit here and try to persuade you to come with me to dinner. Mm-hmm. But that's not influence, that's persuasion. Influence is what happens when something happens in the world and I'm the one that comes into your mind and you're like, I wonder what Andy thinks about that. Which probably doesn't happen, but one day hopefully it will happen if I gain enough influence, right? That's the difference. Persuasion takes energy, influence is passive, it doesn't happen. It takes a lot of experience, it takes a lot of engagement, it takes a lot of assessment, energy, trust. It takes a lot of effort to get someone to a place where you have influence over them. But there's a framework for that. There are frameworks and frameworks within frameworks that I'm happy to teach if you want to go through those.
Yeah, whatever you think is most useful for me and my audience.
So I'll start with this. I'll start at the lowest possible place, right? And the lowest possible place, if you think of influence up here as an umbrella, there's a sub framework inside of that umbrella, and then there's a third inside of that. So we're going to start with that one first and grow. And that framework is something called sense-making. Because if I want to influence you or if you want to influence me, we have to make sense of the dynamic of our relationship. Meaning, one of us has to be in power, and one of us has to comply with the other person's power. That's the whole goal of sense making. So that's why we are starting at that framework. Inside of sense making, if you imagine it like a cup, right? Sense making is like a cylinder. And just like you fill a cup with water, you'll fill this cylinder with sense. The bottom third of the cup is what we call avoidance. That's where every relationship starts. Every time you meet a new person, you try to avoid that person. It's the first thought you have, even if you don't want to admit it.
No, I'll admit it. No, that's very much the nature of my life.
That's the nature of that's human nature. We avoid what's new. So the first third is avoidance. So you've got to fill the water. You've got to fill the relationship. You have to put enough time and energy into the relationship to get past the bottom third. Now you're making sense. The next third is called competition. Competition is all about the exchange of information, the exchange of ideas, the exchange of energy, because in an exchange, you're building a relationship. Even if you're arguing, even if you disagree, even if you hate the other person and you're yelling in their face, you're still investing energy into that person. Whereas if you really didn't care about them, you would just avoid them altogether. The last third is called compliance. The whole reason that you compete is to have someone come out with compliance. And compliance is the part where the power dynamic is identified, right? So we've invested so much time in competition that now we're not arguing and fighting anymore. Now we're starting to make sense of our relationship. You've heard the phrase, we'll just agree to disagree. Essentially, that is the top of the sense-making cylinder. You've filled the cup. And where you land at the end is, we'll just agree to disagree, which is kind of a mutual understanding of each other's position on whatever it was that you were competing over. But you're still a unit. You've still invested into a relationship. So sense-making is filling that first cup, because now what we know at the conclusion of this phase is that we're in this together. I've poured water in, you've poured water in, and if there's anything that human beings hate to do, it's waste their energy. So I've put all this energy into you, you've put all this energy into me, and now we have a dynamic between us. Once there's sense, once we understand, and remember, this is, if we agree to disagree, then we've made sense of our relationship as mutual peers on this particular topic, politics. That doesn't mean that we're mutual peers in terms of conversations about family or conversations about business or conversations about, you name it, exercise, right? But we have a relationship enough that now we can talk about those other things. So if I want to build influence, or if you want to build influence, the first thing we have to do is not let people avoid us. We have to get past the avoidance. And then we have to compete with them to get them to invest their time and energy into our relationship. And then we have to get to a place where there's some sort of compliance, even if it's only the compliance to sit and listen to me when I share my opinion that you already know you're going to disagree with. That's still compliance. That's the foundational framework that feeds up into a secondary framework that we call know, like, trust. Know, like, trust is something that actually exists in the social media world, which was a really awesome surprise to me to find it there. KLT, know, like, trust, starts with discovery. If you don't know something exists, you can never like it because you don't even know it exists. Once you know something exists, you have to decide whether or not you like it. Well, how do you decide whether or not you like it? Through this avoidance, competition, compliance, sense-making process. Because as soon as you discover something new, it's new. So guess what you try to do? Avoid it. You see what I'm saying? So after you get through the end of the compliance phase of sense-making, you like whatever it is or whoever it is that you're dealing with. Maybe you don't like them like they're your best friend, but you've invested all this time and energy into them, so you do like them. The secret sauce at CIA that we know that most people don't understand is that you don't have to like something a lot before you start to trust it. You've heard the term falling in love. There's also a very real term called falling into trust. You just spend enough time, long enough, and what happens is, without even realizing it, you start to trust the person that you're with. That is the beginning of influence. Even if I'm wrong, even if you disagree with me every step of the way, even if the only thing you like about me is going out and having a pint on Friday night, where we debate and argue and bitch at each other about politics, you still like Friday night going to the bar and sharing a pint with me. You still like hanging out with me when we watch our two different soccer teams play or football teams play. So because you like me enough to be with me, there will come a time where I win your trust in something, in some area. Maybe it's trust because I'm the only person who drinks with you. So in a moment, you decide to tell me about how much you hate your boss, and now I'm the only one that knows you actually hate your boss. Whatever it might be, you will fall into trust. We all fall into trust. It's one of the things that's natural to human beings that we hate about ourselves is we trust the wrong people. It happens to all of us.
So someone can trust you in terms of influence, even if they don't like you?
Correct. Because they will be invested enough into you that they believe something is predictable. Think about somebody that you don't like. Think about somebody you really, really don't like.
Yeah.
Are there still things about them that you would trust them to do? Maybe not things they would do for you, but there are certain things that you would trust that they would do. I already know that person's gonna, say something stupid to my kid. I already trust that person is gonna put their garbage can at the end of my driveway. So it's fascinating because we usually think of trust as only being a positive term. Trust is an ambiguous. It is an agnostic term. It doesn't mean good things or bad things. It just means a predictable outcome.